NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. 85 Palestinians have been killed while seeking aid at UN aid trucks in northern Gaza, according to Hamas-run Gaza's health ministry. This is the highest toll among the repeated deaths near the aid centers. Japan's ruling coalition suffered a major setback in Sunday's upper house election, losing its majority and further weakening Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's hold on power. Meanwhile, Ishiba has vowed to stay on as leader, citing an urgent August 1st deadline to strike a tariff deal with US President Donald Trump. Russia has launched another wave of drones and missiles on Ukraine overnight, killing at least one person and igniting fires across Kyiv. According to city officials and Mayor Vitaly Klitschko, damage from the attack included a subway station, commercial properties, homes, and kindergarten across 4 districts of the capital. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will meet U.S. President Donald Trump this week in Washington, hoping to secure a more favorable trade deal. Before the August 1st deadline, according to media reports, Prime Minister Marcos will be the first Southeast Asian leader to visit President Trump in his second term. Foreign Ministry has confirmed that President Xi Jinping will meet European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa in Beijing on Thursday, marking 50 years of diplomatic ties. While the EU-China summit comes amid escalating trade tensions as China's Commerce Ministry condemned the European Union's new sanctions on Chinese entities linked to Russia's military as mistaken, Beijing warned the EU of a serious negative impact on bilateral economic relations, according to official statements reported today. Torrential rains have caused deadly landslides and flooding in South Korea, raising the death toll to 17. Meanwhile, South Korea's Unification Ministry said it is exploring ways to improve relations with North Korea, including the possibility of allowing individual tours into the north, according to media reports. Alaska Airlines grounded all flights on Sunday temporarily after an undisclosed IT outage disrupted systems, marking the second time in just over a year that it has grounded its entire fleet, while it has been reported that Alaska Airlines has now resumed its operations. At least 19 Palestinians, including children, have died from hunger in the past 24 hours in Gaza. That's according to a doctor at Al-Aqsa hospital in Deir al-Balah, who says the health system is collapsing, staff are too weak to work, patients are starving, and even infant formula is run out completely. The situation is so dire, the UN's top humanitarian official for the Palestinian territories, Jonathan Whittle, is now in Deir al-Balah and says he's staying put amid escalating Israeli airstrikes. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has issued new evacuation orders for Deir al-Balah, where no ground offensive has previously taken place. People have been told to move towards al-Mawasi on the coast as Israeli expands operations into new areas. Now we are joined by guest Kobi Michael. He's a senior researcher at the INSS and Misgav Institute, joining us live from Israel. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, Kobi, what more can you tell us about how is this situation covered in Israeli media?
Hello, thank you for having me. The situation is actually the continuation of the military operation that began in March 18 after the end of the last ceasefire. And actually the military campaign continues because Hamas continues refusing to sign on the agreement for the next ceasefire and the release of the hostages. Israel declared that if Hamas will continue refusing to sign on the agreement, the military campaign will continue until the full occupation of the Gaza Strip. And this is exactly what is going on now on the ground in al-Balah area. By the way, this is the first time since October 7th that Israel attacks in a military campaign this area. Because in the past we thought that, or we had some intelligence indications that Hamas keeps or holds the hostages in this area, so we avoided from attacking this area. I assume that if we are attacking now this area, maybe we have different intelligence. Anyway, this is another phase of our military campaign.
And Professor, what are the ethical and legal responsibilities of the international community when civilians, including children, are dying from hunger in the conflict zones like Gaza?
First of all, children are not dying from hunger. There is no starvation in the Gaza Strip. These are the nonsense and the propaganda and the narrative that Hamas tries to echo. And unfortunately, some elements in the international media and among international aid organizations are willing to adapt or to internalize. The number of the trucks of humanitarian aid that enter on a daily basis to the Gaza Strip is much higher than the number of the trucks that used to enter to the Gaza Strip before October 7th, before the war. There is no any shortage of humanitarian aid. There are 4 distribution centers that are run by the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
Professor, if so, then
yes.
what would you explain, or how would you explain about the visuals that we are getting if those were not the case, that children are starving in Gaza?
There are two explanations. The first one is AI, and the second one is that those people, mainly those people that are filmed as fatalities or casualties, are people that were killed or injured by Hamas itself, because Hamas does its utmost efforts in order to prevent people from reaching to the distribution centers, because they know, Hamas knows, that when people will get their humanitarian aid from these centers, Hamas will lost its control over the population and the territory. And Hamas doesn't hesitate to murder its own people in order to prevent them from reaching to these distribution centers. And therefore, when they inform about fatalities and casualties, first of all, they exaggerate. Secondly, they do not distinguish between terrorists and civilians. And thirdly, they blame immediately the IDF, where actually they were the ones who killed their own people in order to prevent them from reaching to these centers.
Professor, thank you for sharing your insight. Please stay with us as we stay in the region. The visuals that we showed earlier are not AI, and they are from sources that we can trust. Now we move on to our next news. In Syria's Sueda province, the government has begun evacuating Bedouin families after a week of bloody clashes between Druze civilians and Sunni Bedouin fighters. The violence, which erupted on July 13, has claimed hundreds of lives and risks derailing the country's fragile post-war stability. Video shows buses escorted by Red Crescent vehicles and ambulances as Bedouin families, some carrying belongings on trucks to free the area. Authorities have not released details on the terms of the evacuation or whether it is part of a wider hostage swap agreement which collapsed in talks this weekend. At Sueda's national hospitals, doctors say entire families have been killed. Dozens of bodies still lie outside awaiting identification. Let's listen in to Dr. Kaptul from Sueda.
أو المجازر العائلية يعني عيلة مثل هي عم تاخذ ذكرى أبيك، عم بتكون عيلة متلفة وقرب منزل وربة منزل وأبنائهم عم بيروحوا عم بيموتوا كلهم، صح تموت عم بتضل جثث بأرضها، ما في ناس رمقت من كتر المشفت عطلة. في دكاترة حتى بتوع طلق كمان استشهد على الطريق، هدول سيارة دكتورة كاتب كمان استشهدت على الطريق، هدول كلهم عم بيموتوا ليجوا يصفوا إنسان بغض النظر لا عارفين على التيم ولا عارفين على الأكل ولا عارفين الموت. في حالات وصلت على المشفى كون الإسعاف قتلوا المسعف واللي عم ينسعف قتلوه من برا بس تابوه من الخيط الخلاف. نحن منا بس نتعامل بموضوع إنسان.
Now we go back to our discussion with Kobe Michael. He's a senior researcher at the INSS and Miskav Institute. Thank you, Kobe, for staying with us. Professor, what role should the Syrian government and international organizations play in ensuring the protection and rights of displaced communities, such as the evacuated families in Syria region?
The situation there in South Syria, in the Druze mountain or the town of Sweda, is very complicated and goes back to the roots of Syria pre-El Jolani. I mean, Syria during Assad regime, the father and the son. There are disputes between the Druze and the Bedouin tribes there, which are Sunnis. And the Druze were part of the Assad regime because according to their belief, their religion belief, they have to be totally loyal to the government and to the state or the country that they live in. They don't have a country of their own, and their religion bans actually an independent Druze country. So once Assad regime collapsed, the Sunnis there in the region came in order to revenge and began slaughtering and massacring the Druze there, and we found ourselves in a very chaotic situation and a very problematic situation. The problem is that we still do not know for sure if Al-Jolani himself, who used to be a jihadist, okay, he is part of this plan. If he is militias actually organized this massacre of the Druze together with the Bedouins, and if this is the situation, then we are in a very severe problem. If it is not the situation, it means that Al-Jolani doesn't control effectively his militias. In both cases, or for both interpretations, we are in a problem. So what Israel tries to do now is actually to protect the Druze on the one hand by deterring the Bedouins on the one hand and the Syrian regime on the other hand, and to reach to some understandings with the Syrian regime with regard to ceasefire in this area. I hope that it will be a stable ceasefire, although I think that there are some very good reasons for the people who live in this area to continue fighting between of them, and I hope that we will not see too many casualties.
And Kobe, how might renewed sectarian violence between Druze and Sunni groups affect Syria's long-term prospects?
First of all, this is a destabilizing effect. First of all, for Syria itself. Secondly, for Israel, because the Druze or the Druze mountain and the Sweda area are part of what Israel considers as a buffer zone, which means that this is an area that should be controlled and with no military presence. And the idea of the buffer zone is the idea of preventing the jihadi militias from reorganizing themselves and attacking Israel from these areas. The Druze in this regard are part of the Israeli interest because they assure in this way or another, or they prevent in this way or another from the Sunni militias, the Sunni jihadists there, to reorganize themselves. So Israel has to act there, and Israel has to assure that this area will remain as a security buffer zone, and therefore Israel attacks any convoys of Sunni militias that try to reach to the area, in order to prevent, first of all, any casualties and massacres to the Druze community, and secondly, to prevent any presence of armed forces in this area. Israel tries to reach to understandings with the Syrian regime with regard to the conducting or the managing of this security buffer zone. We have succeeded in reaching to some understandings with the Syrian regime. Unfortunately, these understandings were violated or breached by the Syrian regime when it enabled these militias to reach to this area, and we saw what we saw in July 13.
Thank you very much, Professor Kobi Michael, for joining us today and sharing your insight as a senior researcher all the way from Israel. Now we move on to our next news. Iran will hold nuclear talks with Britain, France, and Germany in Istanbul this Friday. The Iranian Foreign Ministry announced the deputy foreign ministers will lead the meeting, which comes amid rising pressure from Europe to restart stalled negotiations. The three countries have warned that if talks fail, they'll trigger this UN snapback mechanism by the end of August, reimposing sanctions lifted under the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi criticized the warning, calling it baseless and urging the countries to drop threats. Iran maintains its nuclear program is solely for peaceful use. Now we're joined by Keith Vaz. He's a former UK minister joining us live from London. Thank you, Keith, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, what specific outcomes is the UK as well as EU government seeking from Friday's talks in Istanbul?
Well, I think what is important about these meetings is that they restart the dialogue that had stopped as a result of all the activities over the last few months and years. And everyone thinks it's in the interests of peace and security, not just as far as Iran and Europe is concerned, but the peace and security of the world, that these talks restart. And so, having withdrawn from the agreement that has been reached, these three countries, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, are re-engaging in this dialogue. Remember what's happened, even in the last few weeks. America has bombed Iran, and President Trump has said that the nuclear forces of Iran have come to an end. So Iran could quite legitimately saying, well, it's all over, isn't it? Why are we having these discussions? From the point of view of the three European powers, they do want these discussions because they do want a dialogue. And unless you have this dialogue, you can't stop Iran doing what it is doing. So let us all hope that the discussions taking place in Istanbul are successful, because it's in everyone's interests, Iran and the rest of Europe, that they are successful.
And is there some red line that we can speculate here that would prompt triggering the UN snapback mechanism?
Well, the red line is that Iran has to stick to the agreement that it made at the time when everyone was signed up to this deal. And it's very clear that according to those who are not part of the Iranian regime, it's quite clear that they have not stuck to the agreement. Hence the difficulties that they've experienced and the challenges which have been brought about by the Trump administration. So the red line has already been crossed. The issue is, can you get on behind the red line and make sure there are meaningful discussions? So Istanbul is very important to ensure that this happens. The Americans, of course, always feel that they have to be included at the table. In this particular case, they are downplaying the significance of the discussions. That is why the European powers need to get on with it, because time is very short and we need to make sure that that dialogue recommences.
Thank you very much. Please stay with us as we'll come back to you for our next discussion. Now we move on to our next news. A military training jet has crashed into a school campus in Dhaka, Bangladesh. The Bangladesh Air Force F-7BJI aircraft went down at Milestone School and College in Uttara. Local media reports suggest multiple students may be injured or killed. Rescue operations are underway. Authorities have confirmed that the pilot is dead and 50 more have sustained injuries. Local media says the toll may rise. Now we move on to our next news. US President Donald Trump has posted an AI-generated video showing the Federal Bureau of Investigation arresting former President Barack Obama in the White House. The video posted by Trump on his Truth Social starts with Obama saying that especially the president is above the law. The development comes days after U.S. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said that the Obama administration should be tried over claims of Russian influence in Trump's U.S. presidential win in 2016. Gabbard claimed 114 pages of heavily redacted emails have revealed that former President Barack Obama's National Security Cabinet faked and manipulated intelligence behind the assessment that Russia wanted Trump to win the election. In a post on X, Tulsi Gabbard wrote that their goal was to usurp President Trump and subvert the will of the American people. In the post, she also said that every person involved in this conspiracy must be investigated and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Donald Trump's video led to a flurry of reactions in social media, with many users questioning whether Obama could be arrested in the coming days. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Keith Vaz. He's a former UK minister. Thank you, Keith, for staying with us. Now, what steps can governments and social media platforms take to address the spread of politically charged deepfake content without infringing on free speech?
It is extraordinary. It's unbelievable that the President of the United States should be, in effect, faking a video showing that one of his predecessors has been arrested for something that he has not done. It just bewilders me that the Trump administration could spend any time on this matter. If there is a serious issue concerning meddling in an election campaign, then it should be dealt with by the appropriate authorities. And that means the Attorney General, not the National Security Advisor. Of course, President Trump and his MAGA supporters have always maintained that the election of the last election was stolen from him, and that the Clinton election, Clinton versus Trump, was also an election where there was manipulation. Now, the narrative is that a manipulation was on the part of the Russians. And I think that there was a general feeling that there was some kind of meddling going on. What precisely, nobody knows. But Trump won that election. So why would you invent a video of a former president being investigated, put it on a platform called Truth Social, when there is no truth to it, and assume that people are going to believe it? It's complete nonsense. I would have thought that the President of the United States would have more to do with his time than put out videos of this kind. One can only assume this has been put out by a volunteer in his office or an intern, not by the president himself. So I think we just have to grin and bear it. Barack Obama has not been arrested. He is carrying on doing his work. And the president should carry on doing the important work of this country rather than putting out videos of this kind.
Yes, indeed. And now, in light of allegations like those made by Tulsi Gabbard regarding intelligence manipulation, how important is transparency and accountability in intelligence services for maintaining democratic integrity, both in U.S. and internationally?
Well, the intelligence services in the United States, as in the British Parliament, are scrutinized by appropriate committees. In the American situation, you've got the Security Committee. Here we've got the Security and Intelligence Committee. There is a report that's been published. Let them investigate it. But let's not muddy the water by saying that Barack Obama has been arrested. This distracts from the meat of the subject. Of course, we started this week with a discussion on the Epstein files. And as we know, Donald Trump always likes to be in charge of the news cycle. This is clearly what's happening in this particular case. So I wouldn't put much store by it.
Thank you very much, Keith Vaz, for joining us today and sharing your insight as a former UK minister. Now we move on to our next news. In a sharp escalation of trade dynamics, U.S. firms are rushing to secure critical supplies of rare earth permanent magnets as imports from China surged a staggering 660% in June. According to customs data, 353 metric tons were shipped to the U.S., following Beijing's partial easing of export restrictions under a newly inked trade framework with Washington. Rare earth magnets vital to industries like electric vehicles, wind turbines, and medical imaging remain overwhelmingly dominated by China, which controls over 90% of global production and refining. The recent spike in exports comes after April's export licensing requirements, widely viewed as retaliation for U.S. tariffs. The renewed flow of magnets is expected to ease supply constraints that disrupted sectors from European auto parts to Tesla's humanoid robotics. Still, analysts caution that creating alternative supply chains could take years due to China's technical edge in rare earth processing. In response, U.S. firms like Apple and MP Materials are investing heavily in recycling, including a $500 million domestic facility aimed at strengthening magnet supply resilience. Now we're joined by Joshua Barnes. He's an anchor and correspondent at NewsX World. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this rare earth topic?
Well, yes, Asuma, as you've already detailed, of course, a big jump in the amount of rare earth minerals being imported and exported following an easing of tensions between the US and China. This was a big point of contention in those trade talks, with rare earth minerals vital to technology and other key sectors. China is such a huge producer, up to 90% of all rare earth minerals coming from China, so this was a key sticking point, and during that trade war and trade relations, it was a point that needed to be resolved. It now has, and positive communications between the US and China do continue towards a potential trade deal, but this one clear issue seemingly resolved with a resumption of rare earth mineral exports.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. At least 18 people are dead and 9 others missing after days of relentless rain triggered deadly flash floods and landslides across South Korea. The southern country of Sancheong was the worst hit, accounting for more than half the fatalities. According to the Interior Ministry, over 14,000 people have been forced to evacuate as heavy rains destroyed homes, farmland, and livestock across 15 regions. Footage shows entire villages engulfed in mud, cars swept away, and rescue crews digging through debris in Gapyeong. A camping trip turned deadly when a man was swept away, his wife and son still missing. Authorities say some areas received over 30 inches of rain in just a few days. The military is now assisting with cleanup as the nation braces for more unstable weather. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.